It's time now for our focus report. And just last year, Theresa May boldly asserted that the UK was coming together on the issue of Brexit. But with just 12 months to go to bash out a deal with the EU, Britain seems ever more divided. So much so that one columnist has even ironically suggested that the kingdom should split into two separate countries in March next year. That's Remania for those that want to stay with Brussels, and Brexitland for those keen to cut ties. Our team has been up and down the realm to find out more about what the electorate actually wants.
These are the great agricultural plains of England, home to the highest proportion of Eastern Europeans in the country and the biggest vote for Brexit. They lie between Boston on the east coast and Nottingham in the Midlands. One issue that constantly arises when debating the EU is immigration. A particular problem here, Eastern European gangmasters who abuse their workers and turn them into slaves. To deal with this problem, last year, the authorities set up a dedicated body with police powers. Their director of strategy is Daryl Dixon.
We're arriving at a farm in Nottingham where we're going to meet a farmer who was instrumental in assisting us in identifying the exploitation of workers who had been supplied to the farm. And we were able to dismantle that gang that was exploiting workers who were coming to the UK to work in the agricultural sector.
The farm employs up to 300 workers, over 600 acres. Owner John Hammond found out that gangsters were operating within his own workforce.
One of the abused guys confided in his supervisor that he'd been held against his will by his landlord for almost 3 years. An investigation then started into what transpired to be not just one guy but two guys in this situation.
A Polish man was jailed for 8 years on charges of human trafficking. Sajman Brzezinski forced his recruits to work for €25 a week in deplorable conditions. To put an end to this type of practice, the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority launched over 140 investigations. 91 people were arrested.
We have had situations where there has been violence to individuals as well.
Crimes like these are bound to have an impact on how people perceive the EU locally. As Brexit talks come to a crunch, immigration is still a key issue. John is one of the minority here who voted to remain.
The people that I know in this area have been disappointed to have the number of EU migrants coming into the area, taking jobs that they perceive to be ones that should have been in the locality. But the reality is that there is a very, very small part of the population that is prepared to work in the kind of industry that we're in.
East of Nottingham lies Boston. 75% of people here voted to leave. Eastern European workers account for about 20% of the town's population. Julian Thompson runs a small electrical company.
It was definitely immigration. Everything was under stress, the council services, doctors' services, everything. So something had to stop with it. It would have been nice prior to that to have had some sort of help with it, and it didn't arrive. So I think people had got fed up with that and did the either the protest vote.
Almost 2 years on, talks between the UK and the EU on Brexit have caused so much confusion in voters' minds that if the referendum was run again, Andy Izzard would change his vote.
I honestly believe I would vote to stay in Europe now because I don't trust this government to actually get a Brexit which will be good for the working class of this country.
Since the referendum, Julian Thompson and Andy Izzard took part in a series of debates for BBC Radio with some of those who voted to remain from the pro-EU area of Brixton in London. After these meetings, they decided to create a community group to foster the integration of Eastern Europeans.
We formed this committee to try and make Boston work again.
Sylvia is from Poland. She's married to an English soldier who voted to leave.
Although I understand my husband's reason for voting out, of course, personally, it hit me a little bit, especially in Boston area. This big propaganda around this referendum was all the East European people going to leave after the referendum.
But most of those who had settled in Boston stayed. Sylvia believes that in the long run, the Brexit debate helped improve relations.
people actually start talking about what positive the migrants community bring into this part of the country.
Brixton, in South London, is the polar opposite of Boston. People here take pride in living in a multicultural, multi-ethnic area. It had the highest vote to remain in the referendum. Irfan Mohammed grew up here. His Pakistani father started this butcher's shop 40 years ago. Irfan is a fierce Remainer, but he's pragmatic.
The country has decided to leave the EU. But the good thing is that we have a choice, which is by either we go with Theresa May's hard Brexit or Labour's policy of staying within the customs union, which is a very big benefit to the country.
Brixton has a strong community network. The Pound Cafe is a good example of social enterprise, a meeting ground for various groups. With one rule, here customers pay what they can in the currency they choose.
The mix that we have here, you have a lot more openness, a lot more tolerance. You also have a lot more community activism. Brixton is great for small groups and small projects, very much like our own, popping up. I'd say that people have a greater consciousness of others, a greater consciousness of difference.
But why did 70% of voters here choose to remain? Tom Shackley runs bicycle tours across Europe.
Instinctively, that desire to want to cooperate, that understanding that certain challenges can't be dealt with on a kind of nation-state level, I think that all makes sense. I think the idea that you can solve like big issues like climate change or cross-border terrorism, by yourself is just like ridiculous.
Brixton and Boston voted differently on Brexit, but most would agree on one thing. No one knows what relationship this country will have with its neighbours after 2020.